Welcome to Divorce and Relationships Decoded, the show that takes the guesswork out of love, loss, and everything in between. Hosted by me, Jennifer Perri, a CDC certified divorce and empowerment coach, and Dr. Deborah Wilder, a divorce and relationship expert. This is the place where real conversations meet expert advice. So get ready to decode divorce and relationships like never before. Divorce and Relationships Decoded starts now. Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. I am one of your hosts, Jennifer Perri. I'm a CDC certified divorce coach, and I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Deborah Wilder, who is a divorce and relationship specialist. Hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Jennifer. How are you doing today?
Good. Today, we are going to talk about something that I have heard of, but I cannot wait to learn more. And it is about attachment styles. And Dr. Wilder was just sharing with me that there are 4 attachment styles, and we're just going to figure out what those are. And it's really how we relate to other people in relationships. So can you kick us off with letting us know what the 4 types of attachment styles are?
Sure. There's secure attachment. There's anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. So secure attachment, folks, they're comfortable with emotional intimacy and autonomy, generally in relationships. And these don't have to be romantic relationships. They could be family, friends, even work relationships, and certainly romantic relationships. Any kind of relationship that's important to us, that carries some weight in our lives, these attachment styles can certainly affect. So secure attachment people, or with those attachment style, with secure attachment, they're more comfortable in their own skin, and they're more comfortable in a relationship, and it's more of a give and take. There's usually not a sense of fear or any great concern in those relationship dynamics from that perspective. An anxious attachment person is generally scared of abandonment, and there's often a sense of dependence and worry in that relationship. That person might leave. So there's often and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how these attachment styles play out in relationships. So anxious attachments, they're anxious about someone leaving them, abandoning the relationship. The avoidant attachment style person tends to be less comfortable with emotions and emotional intimacy and more comfortable with independence and maybe less dependent on somebody else in the relationship. And then you have the disorganized, and these are very simple explanations, but the disorganized attachment person goes often between the anxious and the avoidant, because this tends to come from childhood trauma. Not always, but often there's childhood trauma where the caregivers were confusing in the way that they cared. Sometimes they cared, sometimes they didn't care well. And so it became confusing. So there's this disorganized style of attachment. And it's interesting because I work with a lot of couples, and sometimes they're not very well matched in attachment styles. If you take, let's say, someone who is an anxious attached person who is with someone who is an avoidant attached person, you can get some difficulty when there's conflict, because usually the anxious person wants to resolve things right away, take care of things right away, because they're scared of this person leaving them, and the avoidant one kind of doesn't necessarily want to deal with it so much. So you have this one chasing this one, and then that leads to some significant problems in the relationship. When we talk about conflict management and resolutions and things like that, there's some specific things that people can do to have a healthier way of interacting with each other when there's trouble. So attachment styles are very interesting.
Do you find that people can be a combination of 2, or as you get more comfortable in the relationship, your attachment style changes?
I think there are levels. So I think if you're, depending who your partner is, if you have, let's say, someone who is anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, who is connected with someone who has a secure attachment, that secure attachment person and those dynamics might mitigate some of the tension from the other side. But if you've got any of those 3, the avoidant, anxious, and the disorganized with each other, it's hard to, I'm not saying it can't change, and these people can't develop differently or learn different coping skills. And therapy can help a lot with that too. So yes, we can change and modify our attachment styles if we do some kind of usually some deep work, or at least if we can understand what all this means. Where does it come from? And how does our behavior contribute to issues in the relationship, and how does the partner's behavior contribute, and things like that. So again, knowledge is powerful, and the more we know about these styles, the better we can deal with them. But I think the secure attached person with any of the other three can help to mitigate some of that. In my experience, I've worked with a number of couples where there's the avoidant and the anxious. And unless there is a system in place for how to deal with conflict, it's so circular. It just happens so often. And I'm not going to say that these relationships can always work out. Sometimes they can, but sometimes the injury, let's say, of the anxious attached person or the avoidant, sometimes the injuries that they've experienced, the mental and emotional, of course, physical, but sometimes those can really get in the way. Without hard work, those can really get in the way of having a functional relationship more than a dysfunctional one.
I feel like I know who I am as far as identifying myself in the attachment styles, but I also do feel like there are some things that you bring baggage from your past. And I'm not a very trusting person. I have a handful of people I trust, you being one of them, obviously my husband being another one of those. But I've gotten better as our relationship has progressed. We've been together 10 years. There are things before at the very beginning I think I was more refrained from, and I didn't want to open up and share so much of myself with in certain areas because I wasn't exactly sure how that was going to be received. But now we share everything. I keep thinking back to, you said something a few episodes ago where we always send our personal representative at the beginning. I think that's the best thing I've ever heard, where it's true. And I think too, when you're in a relationship with somebody and you're considering spending a lifelong time with them, whether it's just in a committed relationship or marriage, I think there are things that over time will change within yourself. I know I'm at a much better comfort level than I was at the very beginning of it. That's not really an attachment style, right? Is that just more of becoming more comfortable in the relationship?
So a couple of things. Yes, people can, I guess the more comfortable we are in relationships, yes, a relationship can help modify our attachment style, as we talked about before. And let me just clarify about the representative comment. Yes, I think when we meet people for the first time, we show up as our best selves. So we show up as our representative. That doesn't mean that's not our true self. We send our representative, which is our best self. And over time, we might discover the person we're with is quite different, or we may end up showing up quite differently. But I think for you, even with, and we all have baggage. We all, anybody who goes through life has, if you want to call it baggage or experiences, whatever, we all carry experiences that have affected us in different kinds of ways. But it could be that you have had a tendency to have a secure attachment, even though you've had a lack of trust because of experiences, the way you were raised. The way that we're raised is typically what tends to create that attachment style. And then the relationships that we're in, those can reinforce those styles. They can, again, modify those styles. But even having a lack of trust, you've learned clearly, again, I've said this before, you and 𝐊 have an amazing relationship, and there's security there. There's trust there. There's a reliance there. And again, an interdependence. But let's say you had awful experiences with someone, and this person you were with before really betrayed you over and over again, lied consistently. And so now you're in the next relationship, and that person is now paying a price. Your previous experience. So now let's say you had a kind of an anxious attachment style. Now the person you're with, you want to know exactly what he or she is doing, when, and just to make sure that this is a little more extreme. Make sure this person isn't lying to you. You may want to have access to their phone or Life 360 to know where they are all the time. And at first it might be okay for this other person. Yet at some point, sometimes the partner gets a little tired of being not trusted. And that's where some of this stuff can come in. The anxious attachment person can become a little bit overwhelming, the energy, so that this person now is really wanting to move away from that. It's a little too much or a lot. too much. And I'm working with a couple of couples right now where there are some significant differences. And let's say you are an anxious attached person who is with a partner who has lied before, who has betrayed you before. That's a tough one, because not only did you not trust as you came into the relationship, also trust was broken in the relationship. So that's a tough one. Sometimes it's more about how do you manage not being able to trust somebody versus not trusting, because there are a lot of people who've been hurt who really won't fully trust. And how do you manage that can be something to work on as well. So I know we're talking about a number of different things, but when we talk about the anxious attached versus, let's say, the one who avoids conflict or discussions or things like that. And I'll stop talking in just a second, but at some point in this conversation, I think it would be good to talk about strategies. How do you manage some of this conflict sometimes?
There was something you said too about your new partner, new relationship paying the price for what somebody else did to you. And I know for sure in the very beginning that happened. I think it was just reactionary more than anything when we talked about a topic that typically would have been a not easy one to discuss with previous partners, where it was much easier for us to discuss because we're open and communicating and we want to be together and there's mutual love and respect there. In a relationship, how do you prevent somebody from paying the price? Sometimes it happens so naturally because you're already ready for what that person's going to say when you touch on the topic, but your new partner or new relationship isn't going to respond that way, but they're still getting penalized for it.
I think it's important in the beginning when you start talking about relationships and how comfortable you are or your past to let that person know, I have trust issues. And there may be times, there probably will be times when I ask some things of you that don't seem reasonable. And I want to make sure that it really doesn't have anything to do with you, but it has everything to do with my own experiences from before. And I hope someday to be able to trust. And it really is more my issue. It's not my issue with you. But if I don't address it, or if I don't say something, if I hold that in, then that's going to come out in some other way, most likely. If I don't put it out there. So when I do say something or do something, please know that I'm trying to work through this. And I am sorry that you're paying a price. If you haven't done anything. Now, if you have, that's a different story. But if you haven't done anything to betray or hurt, then it is important to acknowledge and get help for that, because that could really create, in the long run, real problems. Because at some point, the other person is probably going to get a little bit tired of not being trusted. And that hurts. It's hurtful when you're doing, let's say, everything you can to show this person, I'm not doing anything. Like, I'm here for you. I deserve to be trusted. I haven't hurt you. Yet you still look at me as if I either have or will. And that can take its toll unless there's some help there.
I know attachment styles aren't just related to intimate relationships. Does it differ in friendships? Because in my mind, and looking at it, I would be thinking you may be more lax with a friend that is anxious or disorganized, but almost holding more accountability to your partner, which I guess makes sense in some things. But do you see it being the same type of attachment styles in friendships, or are they a little different? How does that differentiate between true intimate relationships and friendships?
I think in the intimate relationships, the dynamics are much stronger. In a friendship, it could be, why isn't this person I called? And I invited my friend Jennifer to join me for dinner, and she hadn't even called me back. Like, why did she get my message? And then you start ruminating. So it can happen. Or even at work. I walked by my boss's office, and normally he says hello, but he didn't even look at me this morning. Like, this is where the mindset can really have a mind of its own. So it's different, but the dynamics still are at play. And that's just with the anxious attachment. The avoidant person typically avoids things that will heighten emotion and dependencies. Let's say with conflict resolution or conflict issues, what I often recommend is that there has to be a bridge between, let's say, opposites, the avoidant and the anxious or the disorganized. There has to be a bridge because it's not fair, let's say, for the person who's so anxious to just sit in that. It's awful. And so it's not fair, yet it's also not fair to expect the person who needs some time to think about things just to jump into a discussion now about all this stuff. I think one of the things I tell the couples I work with is, let's say, for each of them to acknowledge what's going on. Let's say the anxious attached person might say, I'm really struggling with this and whatever this is, and I really want to talk to you about this. Can we talk about this? Because I'm struggling here. I need to talk to you. I want to resolve this right now. I want to know right now that I'm okay, that we're okay, that you're not going to leave. And the other person just needs some time. It cannot jump right in. And so I encourage the other person to say, I know that you're upset. We're both upset, and I do want to resolve this with you, but I can't talk about it right now. Give me an hour, give me 20 minutes, or it may be that we will talk about it, but maybe we need to wait till tomorrow morning, and then we'll pick a time. I know you're anxious about this. I'm upset about it too, but now I'm not available to talk about this. So if you can acknowledge each other's emotions and make a plan to address it, because this gives the person time to decompress and be able to engage in a discussion when they may just be shut down. And it also tells the other person, the anxious person, I hear you. I know you're upset about this. I want to resolve this. And we're going to do it when we both can do this. So each person is hurting, but not as badly as each one would be separately if there weren't something worked out like this. So a conflict resolution strategy here is very important, and it shows respect. And another question is, what do I want from this conversation? What do I want to happen? And if you think about, I want to resolve this. I want my pain to decrease. I want us to do better. I want our relationship to be better. I want us to be stronger. I want us to be more comfortable with each other. So what do I want from this? And then again, when you approach conflict, you do it hopefully in the spirit of resolution, not in having a winner and a loser. So to acknowledge the pain on both parts, and then to come up with a solution, or at least the next step, so that you can move toward a resolution and a discussion when you're both available.
I have a really close friend who said to me not too long ago, I feel like I just don't know my husband anymore. He's not who he used to be. I want to talk through everything. They're having some struggles around the kids and stuff. And she's like, he just wanders off. Like the next thing I'll call him and he's at a bar, or he's with his friends, or he's out playing golf, or he's doing something, like just totally walked away from the whole conversation. Do you find that people who don't really understand that it is an attachment style thing, that there may not be any resolution in that at all, and it ultimately leads them going their separate ways, and then sitting in front of a judge or a mediator and saying, this isn't working, when all it would have taken is just a little more focus on communicating or having some type of conflict resolution strategy? How can you bridge the gap between the two type of attachment styles?
So I think there are ways, if people put in the work, if people are willing to dive a little bit deeper into and recognize, like a lot of people I work with, they know where the stuff is coming from. And let's say with your friend who wants to take care of things and talk about things, and the husband who, avoids, there's a reason why he's avoiding. His stress goes up. Like it could be that he's feeling overwhelmed and he doesn't know what to do. I don't know them. I don't know what the situation is, but that's very frustrating. That's like clear. She's wanting to take care of these things now, and he's doing whatever he can to avoid doing that. And there's a reason why. And it could be that he doesn't care anymore. It could be that he's so anxious himself that the thought of talking with her, and it could be that maybe, and again, I don't know this person at all, but it could be that the person who is avoiding an interrogation, like you're not talking about necessarily a real discussion. Sometimes it's an interrogation. And it's happened enough where the person is just, the thought of having that interrogation disguised as a discussion is extremely anxiety provoking. So we have to think about, how do you communicate again If you're literally the light is on, the light bulb goes on, you're in a room and like, bam, you're just getting question after question, that can really create anxiety in someone who really doesn't do well with that. It would be interesting. I would want to find out, what is this person, the husband, feeling when he needs a break of something, or he's overwhelmed, or again, maybe he just doesn't want to deal with it. There are all sorts of reasons, but his avoidance is coming from somewhere. And then sometimes that will ramp up the person who is anxious. I think there's a book, I can't remember who wrote it, but something called The Dance of Intimacy. And it talks about, I believe it's many years ago since I heard about it or looked at it, but about the style where you have the chaser, the pursuer, and the pursuee who does whatever he or she can to get away from this. So it's complicated and it's serious stuff, but these can be relationship killers over time if they're not really addressed properly, or if neither one feels like they've got a way out, meaning that there's some way to resolve some of this tension, then it becomes just too painful. And then the cycle kind of happens all over again.
And is the solution for that situation, I guess, would be to meet like with someone like you who could help them figure it out? Or how would they even realize, just in looking at it, that maybe this is just how I'm. So I look at it, when something hits me a certain way, it's either comes from my life experiences and what has happened to me in my past with other people, or part of it, you know how like you hear where it says, that's just how I'm wired. Is it truly how you're wired, or is it just from the environment in which you lived or live that makes us who we are? I think it's probably a combination, but I look at myself as being very secure in my communication and my relationship. But there are things that will cause anxiety in my life. But definitely there will be things that cause anxiety in my life, but they don't bring up conflict. And I can almost feel them coming. You see it, and I know you're going to respond this way. Part of it, I think, is understanding who I am as a person and looking at what my past has not defined me, but you bring that emotional baggage to any relationship, even friendships.
Yeah.
And you're trying to sort that out and trying to be more forgiving. It's a lot to think about when you internally have to think about in a day-to-day relationship with someone. Okay, you don't want to hold them accountable for something somebody else did. You don't want to come at them and do that. You don't want to seem anxious and make more anxiety for them. What are some tips that you can share with somebody who may be finding themselves in this situation?
I think it's important to be able to recognize why you're feeling the way you're feeling. And I think individual therapy can be very helpful. A lot of folks I work with as a couple are in individual therapy as well. And so they're working with their therapist on these sorts of things. I think number one, what's really helpful is to be able to recognize what are my typical ways of dealing with things in a relationship? Because it can be very liberating. Even if you have these difficult attachment styles, it can be very liberating to know, oh, all right, that's why I feel the way I feel. Oh, that's why these things are happening in my relationship. That doesn't change them happening necessarily, but now I understand myself a little bit better, and therefore I can do something about it. I think it's important to participate in life with curiosity when you can, and not just come up with a definitive, this is my life, this is the way that I am. Yes, and some people are wired. I think it's nature and nurture for a lot of things. But yeah, how many siblings come from the same parents and they're completely
totally different.
So
totally different.
Interesting, and even twin studies. So it's nature and nurture. But the more we know about ourselves, the more we can affect what happens to us, how we live life. And yeah, so just if you're having struggles, go get some help, either individually or as a couple, and let the therapist help you identify the patterns in your behaviors, in your relationship, the dynamics, and in your own behaviors, and try to help, number one, decrease the anxiety, and sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes sometimes it's a lifelong struggle, because these are deep, usually core wounds that need to be healed, and you can work on that because sometimes there's trauma associated with. So again, I believe in what's possible, I don't think everything is possible, but there are a lot of things that are, which makes it a pleasure to do the work that I do, that anybody in my position does, because we work with what's possible. Not necessarily what's probable all the time. As long as the possibility is there, I'll try to get in the trenches with folks, but it can be liberating to know as much about ourselves and what makes us tick, and then to let our partners know as well. And then once you've identified these things, then you can come up with some coping strategies, some fair fighting techniques, ways just to deal with the tension and the stress, and work on how do you resolve conflicts when you're so different. And then hopefully over time, the trust will be built. Hopefully over time, some of these wounds will heal when you're in a relationship that continues to get healthier and healthier.
I just want to thank you again, Dr. Wilder, because I feel like every time we come together, there are things I learn. Whenever we have these conversations, I feel better. I feel more educated. Thank you so much for the insights. But before we wrap up today, could you just recap what the 4 attachment styles are, and then just maybe give one tip of advice for someone who may be trying to sort out what's going on with themselves in a relationship?
I think it's important that whenever we're feeling something, I think it's important, good, bad, or otherwise, I think it's important for us to acknowledge there is someone else on this earth feeling the same way, that we are not the only ones feeling how we feel. And however bad it might be or however wonderful it might be, there are plenty of other people. We might not know who they are, but just knowing that there are plenty of other people who feel like we feel in any given circumstance can be helpful. So to recap, there are 4 attachment styles. There's the secure attachment style, where these folks generally feel comfortable with emotional intimacy and autonomy. So kind of interdependence in relationships. That doesn't mean that they don't struggle in relationships, but generally they have a secure sense of being in a relationship. Anxious attachment style folks, they ultimately fear being abandoned, being left. And so there's a desperate, often, attempt to feel like the other person wants to be with them. They need this reassurance. And sometimes the reassurance can push other styles away, like the avoidant attachment person. This person is less comfortable, and these are all generalities. So they're variations of all of this. Let me just throw that out there. But the person who is avoidant tends to avoid, is not as comfortable, let's say, with emotional intimacy, and values independence a little bit more. And so when you mix the anxious and the avoidant, that's when you can have some really interesting dynamics. And then you have the disorganized attachment style. And these are folks who often have some trauma growing, and the other attachment styles that have trauma associated with them as well. But with the disorganized, the caregivers of these kids, when they're kids, they're not consistent. They could be critical. They could be neglectful. They could completely ignore one day and then be interactive on another day. And it's just confusing. So the disorganized folks tend to vacillate between all of the styles. So those are the 4 styles. And then the best thing we can do is to learn about our own attachment styles and how these things affect our relationships. And when we find that we're struggling in relationships, get some help. See about doing some healing work, some inner work to help heal the pain that creates this anxiety, so that you don't have to live life scared of being alone for the rest of your life, or scared of being confronted or interrogated or whatever. But again, knowledge is power. And the more we know about ourselves, the better we can be in a relationship. And then we can learn personal coping skills as well as relationship coping skills and conflict management skills as well. So there is hope, but it really starts with knowing a lot about ourselves.
I appreciate the conversation today. I feel like I always know myself better after I leave your presence. So thank you for that. And for those of you that are watching, if you need someone that can help you in individual counseling or in couples therapy, please reach out to Dr. Wilder. Her information is always in the description. And you can send any questions that you may have to questions@drdecoded.com. And we will be sure that we get to them in one of our questions of the week, or your question may evolve into a topic, as quite a few of these topics have. So again, Dr. Wilder, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
bringing your insight and your guidance into the conversation as always. I really appreciate you.
Likewise. Again, it goes both ways, Jennifer. We have a conversation. We have lots of conversations. Neither one of us is a talking head here, but we talk with each other. And
Exactly.
so it's a group effort.
Absolutely.
I love being with you, and I really enjoy our conversations.
Me too. Make sure that you all subscribe, like, share these conversations with friends that you have. We're not always talking about divorce topics. We are talking about relationships. And I think if you are on the other side of divorce, or you may even be going through divorce, I still want you to understand who you are. And I want you to understand how you can go into the next relationship or the next best friendship that you've ever had, understanding as much as you possibly can about yourself. So please be sure to join us again next week. Check in on our questions of the week. Invite your friends to join us, and subscribe and share this information. So thank you, my friend. I will see you again soon.
All righty. Bye.
That's a wrap for this episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. If this conversation resonated with you, we'd love for you to share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Remember, healing, growth, and transformation happens one conversation at a time. If you have a question, a story, or a topic you'd love for us to explore, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a note at questions@drdecoded.com. Your thoughts and experiences are always welcome here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week for another insightful episode of Divorce and Relationships Decoded.